everyone, and happy Sunday. I hope you've all been having a wonderful weekend. Today I'm really looking forward to sharing some of my most cherished books from my vintage book collection. Many of these I've had since my childhood. They're the sort of books that if there were a fire, I'd just get out of the house, but if I could stop and grab any books, these would be the ones I'd grab. So they really mean a lot to me. I've added to this collection all through my life as well, and I'm really excited to share some of these gems from my vintage bookshelves with you all. Just before I do that though, I wanted to say that although I'll still be posting next Sunday for the Comfort Book Club, after that I'm changing the day that I upload videos to a Thursday. I've realized how much I just need more of a weekend. I work really hard in the week. I often also work over weekends, but uploading a video to my Sundays is just getting too much for me. I need more of a weekend than I'm getting right now. So I'm changing my upload schedule. After next Sunday, it will be going to Thursdays. But let's get on with the books now. So Rumer Godden is one of my very favourite writers, and I'm thrilled to have this beautiful edition of A Candle for St Jude, which is actually signed by her, which makes it really special to me. It says, "For Gilbert Fabes from Rumer Godden." Having a signed book by a favourite author just means the world to me. It's such a magical thing to think that she actually handled this book and inscribed it for someone. It makes it so special to me. This is one of her adult books that also has the theme of ballet that runs through it. So that's another reason why this book in particular is really special to me. I have over the years collected a few vintage editions of some of my favourite Rumer Godden books, and this is one that is really precious to me, and that's the Greengage Summer. This is the first edition with the Shirley Hughes cover, which is my absolute favourite edition. I'm a big Shirley Hughes fan. This is one of my very favourite, probably my absolute favourite of Rumer Godden's books. It's a marvellous story. It's set in France over the summer. It's partly based on what happened to Rumer Godden and her sister when they were young. It's a fascinating book, so well written as all of hers are. And it's a coming of age story as well, which I really enjoy. I like that type of story. But I do adore this Shirley Hughes cover too, so I was thrilled to get such a gorgeous edition of one of my favourite books. Now, another favourite writer of mine, as you know, is Dorothy L. Sayers. This book isn't by her. This is actually The Daisy Chain by Charlotte M. Young. And this has been on my shelves for a very long time, since my teenage years. And although I like the books of Charlotte M. Young, I'd actually like to read more of hers. This is really special to me because it's from the library of Dorothy L. Sayers, and it's signed by her. And that just makes this incredibly special. There's a little card inside that says, "From the library of Dorothy L. Sayers, sold at Sotheby's, London, December 2000. So I got this book in 2000. It was actually a gift from my mum. She bought this online for me, knowing how much I loved Dorothy L. Sayers' Golden Age mysteries in general. And it means so much to me to have this book. I've carried this book around for 24 years now, and it still is so dear to my heart. So one of my absolute most prized books that I have on my shelves. Then another more recent gift from my mum, but a very special one, is this edition of Winter Solstice by Rosamund Pilcher. I adore Rosamund Pilcher's books, and Winter Solstice is one of my very favourites of hers. It's just such a moving, heartwarming story, and this edition is signed by her as well. And of course that makes it extra special to me. So this is another book that I just am so happy to have on my shelves. It's one of my favourite stories. She's one of my favourite authors. So to have this book signed by her really means the world to me. And then another real treasure from my shelves is this gorgeous first edition of Lady Rose and Mrs. Memory by Ruby Ferguson, and it is signed by her. It says, "Greetings from Ruby Ferguson, 1937" inside here. And this is a favourite book of mine as well. I obviously have similar tastes to the Queen Mothers because she also adored this book apparently. And it really is a charming story. It's been republished by Persephone Books, and I first read it through Persephone Books. That's how I came to know it. But I found this copy signed by Ruby Ferguson, and that really means a lot to me because I'm such a fan of Ruby Ferguson's writing generally. I was a huge fan of her Jill Pony books when I was young, but this is such a wonderful adult book by her, and it just makes it that bit extra special to have it signed by the author. So I really cherish this book as well. And then many of you will know how much I love Alison Utley. She's one of my favourite writers, especially when it comes to writing about the English countryside and country life and traditions. Alison Utley is just incredible, and I really adored her books, The Country Child and A Traveller in Time, when I was young. I still love those books so much now. So this is one of my favourites by her that she wrote for adults, and it's A Year in the Country. It's non-fiction, it's little essays that she's written month by month through the year. One of my absolute favourite reads. I return to this book so many times because I love her writing so much. And I have to say, quite an impressive collection of her books. I've really collected them pretty hard over the years. I've always been on the lookout for lovely editions of her books. A lot of them are out of print now, so the only option is to find them secondhand. And I've put a lot of effort into getting as many of her books as I can. And I have a few books by her that are special because they include little cards that she wrote to people. And this is one of them. So it has a little card that was written by Alison Utley. There's her signature at the bottom. And there's also inside this one a little stuck down note from her as well that's signed from 1958. So this is one very special edition to me, not only because I love the book so much, but because it contains a little handwritten card and a little signed note from Alison Utley as well. So very special book. And then I can't remember when I found this, but it was a few years ago now, and it's Ayrian Spring by Anne Bridge. This is a very, very early edition. I think it is actually the first edition of the book, and I just love the cover on this one. I think it's gorgeous. So I was really thrilled to pick this up because I do enjoy the story very much. I first discovered it when Daunt Books reprinted it quite a few years ago now. But I have to say their cover isn't very attractive. So I really do love this old vintage cover of the book, which I think is actually a lot more relevant to the story of the book as well. It shows a scene that's from the book, which I really like. So another gem from my shelves. And then I've raved about The Feast by Margaret Kennedy. A lot of you I know went on to read that after I've talked about it so much on my channel a few years ago. And when I know that I really love a book, then that's when sometimes I'll have a look for the vintage original edition of that book. And I was able to find that with this copy of The Feast. Now, they've done a really attractive new paperback of it, but I do actually really like this vintage edition too. Again, it really is a good depiction of what actually happens in the story. This cliff that falls down on the hotel. That's not a spoiler, by the way, because it happens right at the start of the book. But you can see that looming menace from the cover straight away. So I actually really like this vintage cover. Because it's such a favourite book of mine, I was happy to get this lovely edition of it. Now, a few children's books. So this one has been on my shelves since I was a child. This is one of my very favourite books that I read as a child, Lytte and Valkyries by Elizabeth Goudge. And this is the copy I read when I was young. I still have it now. It means so much to me to have this, and I just have a lot of happy memories attached to this book when I first read it, which is when we were living on Long Island. And yeah, it just means a lot to me to have still some of my old childhood books, because a lot I had to let go over the years, but I still have some, and this is one of them, and it means a lot to me. Now, I've also, in my adult years, collected a couple more of Elizabeth Goudge's children's books that really mean a lot to me. So this edition of The Little White Horse, it's not a first edition, but it's an early edition. And this was one of my absolute favourite books that I read as a child. I still have a really strong memory of when I first read this book when I was 9 years old. We were living at that point in Chicago, and I just remember falling in love with this book. It just meant the world to me. But I just had some paperback copy at that time, and I've always wanted the hardback edition with the lovely cover that's illustrated by C. Walter Hodges, because I just love his illustrations. So I got this a few years ago and was absolutely thrilled to have it. And then also a few years ago, I got this lovely vintage edition of Henrietta's House. This is another children's book by Elizabeth Goudge, but it's actually a follow-on story from one of her adult books, which is called A City of Bells. That's one of my favourite of her adult novels. I really love A City of Bells, and I adore Henrietta's House too. So I was really thrilled to get this lovely vintage copy, even though this is now in print through Girls Gone By, and I really love to have their edition too, because it has all this extra material as well, which is so good. But there's just something about the vintage edition that always really speaks to me, and I love the spine and just the look of it. So that's my sort of children's Elizabeth Goudge collection that really means a lot to me. And then when I was little, I mean, I've collected vintage children's books from about age 9, when I first discovered the Chalet School books by Eleanor M. Brent Dyer. Before that, I read Enid Blyton. I loved all of her boarding school books like Mallory Towers and St Clair's. I also read a lot of pony books. But then I discovered boarding school stories by Eleanor Brent Dyer about a boarding school that's set up in Austria by a British woman and her much younger sister, Joey, who becomes the first pupil. And I just adored these books, partly because I had a bit of an international background, having grown up partly on the French-Swiss border. It really just spoke to me, the kind of international European feel of these stories. I really loved them for that. And I started to collect the books, and I remember my mum finding me a first edition of The School at the Chalet. I can't remember exactly which birthday this was for. I think maybe my 15th birthday, 15th or 16th. It must have been my 15th, because we were still in Long Island, I think. So maybe it was even my 14th birthday. But I remember being so excited to have a first edition of the first book in the series, The School at the Chalet. Next year, this will be 100 years old, which is incredible to think of as well. And I'm excited for Girls Gone By publishers to be reprinting an edition of The School at the Chalet to celebrate 100 years since it was first published. But to think I'm holding a book that is almost 100 years old is quite incredible. And this book is just, it sparked so much for me. It really was part of my love of reading when I was young. It sparked my interest in vintage children's books, and it just led to so much in my life. And here I am doing the Instagram photos for Girls Gone By that republish a lot of the Chalet School books. So it's amazing how these things, you know, come around again in your life, even when you're older. And I still love these. So a very special book on my shelves. And then I was also a huge fan of the Abbey books when I was young. And again, my mum managed to find a very early edition of Girls of the Hamlet Club, which is the first book in the Abbey School series by Elsie J. Oxenham. You have to realize in the days when I was collecting these, it was much harder to find and buy vintage children's books online. It just wasn't so easy as it is now. These weren't being reprinted. Girls at the Hamlet Club is actually now in print through the LCJ Oxenham Society. But back when I was first reading and collecting these, they were so rare, some of these titles, that I just sometimes felt I'd never be able to read them. So I remember the day that I got this, and it was just so exciting. So at that point, this was one of the very rarest stories, but I really wanted it because it was the first in the series. So I still have such affection for this edition. And then most of the writers I loved when I was young weren't actually alive by the time that I was reading their books, but a couple were, and I actually had the privilege of contacting and even meeting two of them. Now, one of them was Margaret Biggs, and I adored her school stories when I was young. She wrote the Melling series, which Girls Gone By have since republished, and they were just huge favourites of mine as a teenager. And I remember one day realising that Margaret Biggs was actually still alive and being able to look her up in the phone book almost, and sort of calling her up. Whilst I was in New York, I phoned her, and she was obviously living in Britain. She's a British author, and got to speak to her on the phone. And I think she was very surprised, but also very excited that girls were still reading and loving her books that weren't even in print anymore. And we had a little correspondence for a few years, sort of sending each other Christmas cards and things like that. And she also sent me one of the books that I was missing from my collection at that time, which was A New Girl at Melling. And she inscribed it for me with best wishes to Miranda. I'm glad you like the Blakes. Margaret Biggs, April 2002. So this has been on my shelf since 2002, and it means so much to me. And then a writer I actually got to meet in person was Antonia Forest. She wrote the Marlowe series, which were another boarding school and also family series that I really liked as a child. Girls Gone By are currently reprinting all of those. And this is one that she signed for me. It says, Miranda, with all good wishes, Antonia Forest inside. And this is amazing because I remember the day that I met her and she signed this book for me. So that's just so lovely, because not only do I cherish this book because she signed it, but I also have the memory of actually meeting her and handing her this book to sign. So that's a reason why it's so special. And then another signed book I have is The Lark on the Wing by Elfrida Vipont. I'm a huge fan of Elfrida Vipont's books for children. The Lark in the Morn and The Lark in the Wing and The Lark on the Wing are the first two in the series, and they're my absolute favourites. They're about a young girl called Kit who's part of a Quaker family growing up in Britain, and she discovers that she has a huge talent for singing. And these two books tell her story and her experience of blossoming into a singer, but working very, very hard to make this her career. They're beautifully written books. I loved them so much as an adult as well. I mean, adults would really enjoy these books too. This is the second one, The Lark on the Wing, and it's signed by Elfrida Vipont. And that makes it very, very special to me because she's one of my favourite writers. So to have a book signed by her really means a lot to me. And then another book that I adore is A Dream of Sadlers Wells by Lorna Hill. This was a ballet series that, again, I just loved as a child. I did a lot of ballet. I wanted to be a ballerina myself when I was young. Then I got an injury that sort of ruined that dream for me, but I've always loved ballet, going to it, and I also still have a real soft spot for ballet stories, and my favourites are the ones by Lorna Hill. And this one is actually signed by the illustrator Eve Guthrie. It's signed by her. It says, with very best wishes from Eve M.S. Guthrie, Edinburgh to Liverpool, September 1950. Here's to our next happy meeting. I love imagining the stories behind inscriptions like that. I love how you never know the full story, but you can sort of guess at it and wonder about it. I always think that's so fun with vintage books to be able to do that. And yeah, it's just lovely to have this one signed by the illustrator. Then a book that I just recently added to my shelves is this lovely vintage copy of Ballet Shoes. Now this is pretty much the same as the copy that I had when I was young. It's a very early American edition of the book, and I actually really like a lot of the American editions of Noel Stratfill's stories. They have some really beautifully done vintage editions of her books, and Ballet Shoes is one of them because it has some really lovely illustrations in it, which is a big part of the charm for me. And it's just really so nice for me to have this copy that I remember from my childhood. I have it back again, and that really means a lot to me because Ballet Shoes is one of my all-time favorite books. It's one of the books again that really influenced my life because it really influenced my love for ballet. But it also has just such a wonderful picture of three young girls who are determined to make a career for themselves, and it's a wonderful example of female ambition, and that has been something that has really directed the way my life has gone as well. So Ballet Shoes is very precious to me, and I'm so happy to have this lovely vintage edition of the book. And then two books that my mum very cleverly found. I think this was just last year, and they mean so much to me, and that's Emily of Deep Valley by Maud Hart Lovelace, and then also Carney's House Party. Now I had paperback editions of these books, but I adore Maud Hart Lovelace. I love her Betsy Tacy series, and I have some of the vintage hardbacks of those too. These are standalone reads, but they feature characters that do crop up in the Betsy Tacy stories, and Betsy makes little appearances in them as well. Emily of Deep Valley is one of my all-time favourite books. I just love it. But Carney's House Party is a real favourite of mine too. These are very rare books to find vintage copies of. And somehow my mum managed to, and even more amazingly, managed to find affordable ones. I don't know how she does it. She really is the book whisperer. But so it means the world to me to have these lovely vintage editions of two of my very favourite books by a real favourite author of mine too. Again, I really felt that the Betsy Tacy books influenced a lot of my life when I was in high school. I had my own sort of crowd, just the way that Betsy does. And it was funny as an adult reading these stories again, I realized how much they'd actually influenced me as a child and influenced how I wanted to interact with friends. And our home was always a place that, like, my friends would come to, and we'd have movie nights and pizza nights, and I'd bake brownies, and you know, it was the modern equivalent to Betsy and her crowd, I think. So those books, again, have been really influential in my life, and I just love them. And then finally, another book that my mum found for me is The Easter Holidays by Kitty Barn. Again, she's one of my favourite children's book authors. Her books are no longer in print, but I do have a pretty substantial collection of her books. And this one is really special because it was actually her own copy. This book was first published as The Easter Holidays. It's a children's book, and then it was later reprinted under a different title. And before it was reprinted, she went through her copy of the original, and it's signed by her, which is really amazing too. But she also made hand annotations. You can see this is her writing, and she's making little changes to the book, updating some of the references as well to fit the reprinted edition of the book. So it's just so exciting to me to have this. It's just it really is a unique edition of the Easter Holidays by her. And it's fascinating to look through it and see what she wanted to change. Yeah, so another very, very special book on my shelves. Anyway, those are all of the vintage books that I wanted to share with you that really mean a lot to me. I'd love to hear if any of you collect vintage books and what books that you have are most precious to you on your shelves. I'd be really interested to hear if you have a book or some books that mean a lot to you, either because they're signed by an author or maybe they have a special memory attached to them, but I'd really love to know. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Extra big thanks to those of you who pressed the super thanks button on my last video. I always so appreciate your support, but I appreciate the support of everyone who helps my work either by signing up to one of my communities like my Seasons of Story Substack. And it was so fun, by the way, all of you who joined me on the Zoom yesterday to discuss I Capture the Castle. That was amazing. But yes, so I really appreciate the support of people who sign up to my communities like that, or also those of you who support my work by watching my videos, putting a comment on and liking. I really appreciate all of you. I'll see you next Sunday for our Comfort Book Club discussion of Anne of Green Gables, and then I'll be seeing you on Thursdays from then on. So until next time, goodbye.